Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Bubeck, and welcome to this special conversation with Gina Lake. Hi, Gina.
Hi,
Welcome.
Grace. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, and welcome to all of you who are watching this video and live here in the Zoom room. So just to let you know, we have a slightly unusual format today. I'll be speaking with Gina about the Jesus speaking audiobooks. And then we'll actually play one of the messages kind of in the middle. And then there'll be space for questions and answers. So the reason for that was for those of you who haven't had an experience of listening to one of these messages or chapters, for you to actually be able to experience it yourself, what this is like. And even if you have experienced them before, maybe you can listen in an even more open way because it's not followed by a transmission. You might discover something for yourself. So, Gina, just to introduce Gina, Gina's been she's been channeling Jesus for a while now, and it used to be, I think there were 4 books that were just books, and then you moved to audiobooks. And I always been intrigued by, that shift to audiobooks, and I just felt that was interesting because audiobooks are something that you're meant to listen to. So maybe you could let us know, Gina, maybe that's what we could start with, what your understanding was of how the audiobooks, why you needed to shift to audiobooks.
Yes. Well, I started channeling Jesus in 2012. And up to that point, I had always just written books, and then I hired narrators to narrate them because it's not as easy as you might think. And it also takes a tremendous amount of time. So I wasn't used to creating audios and didn't even have the setup. But at a certain point, I guess it was after those first 4 books, Jesus asked me to create audios and said that he was going to create a series of books that were meant to be audiobooks more than just read, although they would be books too. And so I agreed to do that. He told me that there was a transmission that was coming through my voice. And I had been told by a couple other people who were psychic that they experienced that as well. And so, it's not that I was aware of that. And I didn't really welcome the idea of doing all the audiobooks because it's a big learning curve. As I said, it isn't that easy to do. But I was willing to do it because I could see the value of that because I've always enjoyed audiobooks myself. And my experience of Jesus is that I hear him. I hear him in my head. There's a certain tonality, a certain pacing of the words. And so my experience of Jesus is auditory. And I've always wanted to be able to share that with people. Although I just haven't wanted to publicly do teachings where I channel to a group of people live. That just wasn't something I felt like doing these days, although I've done that in the past. Mm-hmm. And so creating a little audio studio in my walk-in closet and creating these audios was a really great way for me to teach while still remaining in the background, because I like being in the background. I like being a channel who writes books. And although I've done teaching and I've done mentoring, at this point in my life, I'm really wanting more and more to be in the background. So the whole online thing, of course, really suits that scenario. So so coming up with creating audios and then presenting them online was a really perfect way to both be in public and teach and convey these audio teachings while still remaining in the background. So I like that. And I do think that there is something that comes through the audios. I know that when I'm creating them and when I'm editing them, that I'm in a certain state that's very connected to Jesus. So I enjoy doing it because I'm immersed in that energy when I'm channeling and when I'm writing. I always have been too. But it puts me in that energy longer because I write, I record, and I edit the recording. So all of that time I'm immersed in that energy and going over and over the teachings, which I also really appreciate because they're for me too. So I do feel they expand me when I work with them. And so, and when I asked Jesus about the difference, maybe I'm getting into your next question, but I asked.
Yes. Well,
about,
maybe I can come in there,
Sure.
Gina, and you
Sure.
can bring in what you want to still bring in at that point, because the first question I have, and I'm sorry, I'm usually not that inquisitive, but with this, I really
Oh, I don't know about that.
I really feel it's actually the physicality of it is part of what makes it special. So I just like to kind of inquire into that more, if that's okay by you. Like, for example, one question that came to me is, are you writing these teachings down and then speaking them, or are you recording them as they come?
Good question. And I started out channeling them live in my walk-in closet. And the first, I think, 15 or so were done that way and required a lot of heavy editing. It was very hard for me. I don't know why. I had an easy time channeling the being before Jesus, but I don't have an easy time channeling vocally Jesus. So it was difficult for me. And it took so much time that I asked him, I said, can we write the script first and then read it? And so he said, sure. And so then we've been doing it that way. It's interesting, Grace, because the audio that you chose to play today is one of those audios I recorded live. And
Okay.
and I'm speaking a little bit slower than the ones that I read from a script. But I really like it. I think it does really capture the tonality and the pace. And but it was very labor intensive for me to do it that way. So thankfully we were able to shift.
Yes.
The other thing is when I did shift over, what I found is that because the vocal channeling was so difficult for me, those first messages were a little more simple. And later, the messages were more complex. They were more detailed, more like the writing in my books. So for good or for bad, it did affect it that I'm reading from a script or if I'm doing it live.
Yes.
But I really liked that it went more in depth myself.
So the next question would be is when when you channel directly and record, or when you read from a script, what you're saying is that when you channel the message, you actually, there is a certain energetic transmission that is there for you also.
Mm.
So is that there for you also when you read the message, or was that more there? I mean, does that come back when you read out what you've written? Or is it more directly there when you speak directly into the mic and you record that way?
It's the same, because when I go to read the script, I invite Jesus to speak it. So that energy comes into my body. When I channel, there is an overlaying of energy that happens. And so whether I'm reading it or whether I'm speaking it live, that same overlay happens, and I feel the energy of Jesus saying those words. And so, and I would know if it was not happening, because, there's a definite cadence and intonation and feeling about it that is present when he's present. So I always invite him to do it for me. It's easier that way, too.
Yes. Maybe I can just share. I totally get this. And actually, my first experience of channeling, of listening to somebody channeling, was many years ago in Montreal. There was somebody called Pierre Lessard who channeled Saint Germain in evenings, channeling evenings. And the reason why I went was because there was a very strong transmission of just love, that there was this flavor of love that was just so beautiful. And the thing with Pierre was he actually went unconscious when he channeled. And his body was like really taken over by Saint Germain's energy, and the French was like an ancient French. It wasn't Quebecois French, which is what Pierre Lessard spoke. And the voice changed, and you could actually see his body kind of, making these movements to accommodate this very different energy that was coming through. And of course, most people these days don't any longer go, they don't go unconscious when they channel. They're very conscious, but they're conscious of the energy not being theirs. So there's degrees of that. And I just think it's interesting, that there is a very clear awareness. And I think there's a very clear awareness. Like I'm aware, for example, also when I speak to clients, sometimes there's something that comes through that's not mine. And it's very clear when it's not mine, when it's not my thinking, when it's just an energy that wants to be spoken.
Yes, and that is a kind of channeling. There are two kinds of channeling, just briefly. There's the trance channeling, which you described this Pierre doing, and then there's conscious channeling. And they're different types of channeling, and one kind of channel can't necessarily do the other kind of channeling. So it isn't really a choice of what kind of channeling you do, but that trance mediumship is very hard on the body. So it's preferable to be a conscious channel for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what he said too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yes, so anybody who is serving other people as you do in your work, especially if you invite to connect, you ask to be connected, to higher sources of wisdom and intuition and love and healing, they will connect with you and speak through you, whether you have a name for them or not. But it is, channeling is really done quite often by people who don't consider themselves channels. And maybe the only difference is that I have a name and that it's so accessible. It's, I can access it anytime. And I clearly hear the words in my head, which they just come out of your mouth when you're talking. And when I would do mentoring too, they come out, or teaching, they just come out of your mouth without you thinking about them. So that's also what I do when I give an intensive. It feels like I'm channeling the intensive, and I've just set my mind aside, and the words are just coming out of my mouth, and I'm hearing them for the first time as soon as whenever everyone else is hearing it. I'm not hearing those words first and then saying them. So, it's very common that people who are here to serve do step into that role of being a mouthpiece like that. It's pretty neat.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm wondering, satsang teachers, I mean, they don't channel, but they're so in the moment that whatever is said in that moment, it's not the personality that says it, it's just life, and
I think they are
to my mind, it doesn't matter whether you call that channeling or just expressing truth, it's like it's just an expression of truth that is beyond the person.
Yes, it doesn't matter if you call it channeling or not. And I always try to tell Adyashanti that he was channeling, because anybody who can sit up there for 2 hours and talk create a beautiful lecture like that is connected to something else that's beyond the human self. And especially when you don't know what you're going to say, and it comes out organized, and it touches people, and it's truth. Well, then you're connected to something higher. But like I said, people do this all the time. Sincere people who are wishing to connect to those forces and do so for a reason of service. They do connect to those to that wisdom. And so we are truly not alone and not doing things on our own. And artists and musicians know this as well. They step out of the way, some of them and many of them, and something comes through and they get lost in it, and they didn't know what was going to happen, and they discover after the fact. And it feels good. There's always a certain feeling that accompanies the truth, whether you're actually saying it as a human being or it's coming through you. It just feels good. It feels good, it feels right, and everyone around you relaxes and feels at ease and at peace. That's a sign of truth. And of course, untruth is the opposite.
Yes, untruth definitely feels contracted and kind of tense and tight. And
Can I add what I was going to say about
yes,
the difference between reading words and listening to them? It's just very simple and really quite obvious, but words, although they do carry some transmission, words point to the truth, and they sort of require the reader to connect with that truth inside themselves. And the spoken word, though, and this is what Jesus told me, the spoken word actually carries the transmission. Sound carries the transmission. So that's a big difference. The words themselves don't actually carry the transmission. They point to the place where you can land and receive the transmission, a transmission from the words. But they don't, the words themselves on a paper don't carry the transmission, but the words spoken as sound do carry the transmission.
That's beautiful. Thank you for coming back to this, because I was going to say something very similar. Maybe just, it's a reflection I had, because I'm not an audiobook person, I'm actually a reading book person. So I'd never actually listened to an audiobook. So listening to these audios for me was quite a new experience. And what I felt was that the act of reading, the visual sense, is very it goes right into the left brain. And it's very easy in reading to kind of miss the message, especially when it is a non-dual message, or the pointing, because, the mind is so quick to come in. But when we listen, there is a sensory input that makes one very receptive. And, there's a kind of resonance that happens, and my sense was that the beauty of your speaking was that you're a human being, so whatever resonance is there in you, whatever energetic transmission is there in you from Jesus, transmits itself through the voice. It's almost like it resonates in your being, and because it resonates in your being, it can transmit itself and resonate with other embodied beings that are listening. And there's something about that embodiment of the voice. The voice is a real, it's in the chest, it's not in the head, it resonates in the whole body.
Yes. And sound is physical.
It's very physical, yes.
Yeah. So it's an actual thing. Sound is being transmitted from one person to the next, and then something else, a certain vibration or other transmission, can be carried on that sound wave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing...
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, when people read, it's too easy for the mind to say, I know that, I know that, I know that, and read kind of fast. Mm-hmm. But I purposely... or Jesus purposely through me reads a little slowly, so that people can really sit with what they're hearing. And so that slowness of delivery, I think, is also important, an important part of it, and an important difference. If you listen to an audiobook where the narrator speaks really fast, it's almost like reading, because you're just registering on a mental level. Mm-hmm. But if somebody is, it makes sense to speak these deep truths in a slower fashion, because they deserve a certain experience as they're being said, a certain hitting you on the inside and experiencing what's being said, and that's what is meant to happen. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And also the thing about sound is that because it's one of the five senses, whereas reading is mental, you're in the virtual reality, in the mental realm, but sound is one of the five senses. It's also a meditation of sorts. I've often suggested that to people, that instead of listening to the voice in their head while they're going about their day, if they're doing sort of mundane tasks, plug yourself into spiritual, uplifting talks or something, or books it's much better. That's more like a meditation. And so listening to sound is a meditation itself. You have to focus on the sound of the words. And if you're focusing on the sound of the words, you can't be lost in thoughts, or you're going to miss out what the words are saying. So it is a type of a sound meditation, really. And it's a good way for people to train themselves to be able to focus the mind. You know, and not everybody has the skill of being able to focus their mind. I did a lot of that with writing and editing. That taught me to focus the mind. So I was used to having my own chatterbox mind off to the side and not listening to that, because my mind was busy channeling and intuiting the editing. So I was focused on what was actually happening, on what was real, the actual words in the moment that were coming through me, not the voice in my head. And really, I've said this so often, but the key to spiritual freedom is freedom from the voice in your head, not focusing on that. So if you focus on anything else, you're home free.
Mm-hmm.
And focusing on sound, especially if it's a spiritual book or spiritual words of truth, is an excellent practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If it's okay by you, I just like to come back to the embodiment of the voice, and maybe, it's not that much of a difference, because I had an actual physical teacher, Gangaji, non-dual satsang teacher. And my sense was that the sheer fact that she was a human being, and yet here she was speaking truth that was beyond the human being, that was beyond personality. And yet it was spoken by a human being, and it was embodied in that, made it actually more accessible to me. There's something about the vibration becoming also a physical vibration, that actually makes it more accessible to others. Would you agree to that?
That is a great service that teachers perform, is they are a model for what is possible. And so that's an important teaching. And I don't know that, I think what I'm offering is a sense of connection to other dimensions and the reality of that, and that we're not alone, and that we are more than human, and that it's possible for us to connect even more closely to those dimensions if we make the intention to, and if we open ourselves up to that and receive that. So that's a little bit different than a human showing you what's possible.
Well, you're still a human being, Gina, who is doing that, exactly that herself, So, you're a model for your students and for people who listen to your channeling.
Well, I do hope so.
Yes.
I do try to be that model, and at the same time, it seems the further along the spiritual path I get, the more almost humbled I feel by how difficult it is to be human, and that there is no sainthood. I think I've talked with you about this before, and Jesus wrote that piece called Perfect Imperfection in my book, In the World, but Not of It, I think largely for my benefit, because I think that for me, the spiritual path, I wanted it to be that it led to sainthood, to being a really, really perfect person all the time, never having any kind of upset and all of that. And then the more I mature in all of this, I see that, upsets do happen, but your relationship to them has changed. They don't last very long. They aren't very important. They aren't very big. But, so the amount that we are still human is something that I've been surprised by. That, as long as I've been on this path and as immersed as I've been in these teachings, we are still human. And as Jesus has often said, we are dual creatures. And that duality doesn't disappear. There's always the human side and the divine side operating side by side. In any moment, I can find my human bitchy side. In any moment, I can find it. And I could give voice to it. I don't so much anymore, right? But it's there. And so it took me a long time to really understand how this all works. But, there is, there's two sides of us, and that human side does not disappear. We don't start to walk on water. And that's a little humbling. So
it's good humbling,
it
wouldn't you
is.
say? Because, and also, my sense is that when we are of service, and to the extent that the personality does shrink and does, tend to step aside more, we also, my sense is also sometimes whatever shows up, whether it's bitchiness or judgmentalness, which is one of my things, or anger or whatever, grief, sadness, whatever it is, it's not even clear that it's ours. It may be the pain body of humanity that shows up, and that gets a conscious recognition in a being that is awake, instead of just being repeated unconsciously. So I'm wondering whether we are in this duality, because part of our service is actually bringing that awareness to all this unconscious stuff, whether it's ours or humanity's, in the end, sometimes isn't even clear.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful what you just said. Yes. And so, and that is the progress you make on the path, is that more and more you realize that the negative side of humanity, of your humanity, is the negative side of humanity, and it deserves your compassion. And it isn't personal. It really isn't personal. It's it's present in everyone to one extent or another, and to one extent or another, people give voice to it, and that's the only difference. We're all, we have that potential, as long as we're human, to join with that more, more negative side of humanity.
Yeah. Which brings me to mercy. One of the messages that you suggested we play was the one on mercy. And I felt that was something quite specific to Jesus, the way he introduced that. There's just such deep love in that, of the humanness of us, the human weaknesses, the human, the all the unconscious personal stuff that gets played out. And in the end, we're not going to play this one, but I just felt, I was very touched by that, because there was such deep love that spoke that came through, that spoke in this message. And, you know, it's there in all the messages, but in that one in particular, there was such compassion, such love, such understanding of the human condition, you know, and the challenging aspects of it, the difficulty of it, you know, the difficulty of being in that duality.
And that's what we all need. And I'm so happy that that is such a strong theme in these teachings. Of course, it would be with Jesus: love, forgiveness, mercy, kindness, compassion. I'm so glad because that is what heals. And
Yes.
that is so obviously the truth. That, you know, I'm just so happy to bring through teachings that underline that and help people to relax and be at ease and accept their humanity, be compassionate towards their humanity. How will our world ever change unless we go in that direction? It's exactly the antidote that we all need. And it's why Jesus is so beloved. He's loved by so many people, not just Christians, but people who were former Christians, but people of other religions all over. He's a world teacher, and the truth that he taught then in some of his very famous quotes, which have come down, his basic teachings that we find in some of those quotes, they are so obviously the truth that people of all religions have bowed to them, have honored them, have respected them. And it really, I mean, we know the truth when we hear it.
Yes.
We're built to know that.
Yes. And you know what also occurred to me, Gina, is that when people are on the spiritual path, there's a particular form of judgment that comes in. You know, it's like, oh, I'm not spiritual enough. I'm not, you know, I'm too human. I'm still judgmental. I still get angry. I still react to this or that, or I'm still fearful. And, you know, I shouldn't be if I were really kind of coming from a place of love. You know, when people are in the Course in Miracles tradition, you know, it's like the moment there's fear, it's like, oh my God, I'm still not quite there. And like, so there comes to be, it creates a suffering that's specific to people on the spiritual path. And what I found listening to those messages was that there's such love and such understanding, such compassion of this, this you know, this painful self-judgment just gets totally dissolved. And that is very healing. That is very healing.
Exactly. Thank you for appreciating it.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the people that are attracted to these teachings, people who are already resonating with the truth of that.
Yes, yes. So before we get to playing the message, is there something that you still want to say? Like, you know, one of my questions was, is there specificity to these teachings that you find maybe distinguish them from other non-dual teachings? Because it clearly is a non-dual teaching. Is there something that you feel comes through that's really a particular flavor that these teachings take coming from Jesus?
That's a good question. And I think my primary answer is, and I'm so glad to say this, is that these teachings are very practical. Some non-dual teachings are not practical. They don't include practices. How do I become Christ-like? How do I manifest Christ consciousness? How do I experience Christ consciousness? All of these teachings have answers to how do we become more Christ-like? How do we live this human life from our best self, from our divine self? And so his teachings are full of simple practices, affirmations, and different things that you can do that will help you shift your state of consciousness in the moment, shift from the egoic state of consciousness to Christ consciousness. So I love that about this, and I think that is kind of different and somewhat missing in some non-dual teachings. They do a lot of pointing about you're that and you're not that, but they don't tell you how to get there.
Yes, and these days there's a lot of everybody wants to awaken, so there's a lot of focus on that time or that moment when the shift happens. But there is a sense of something being needed along the way, and even after, because after people awaken, after consciousness shifts, there is still so much that comes up that's unconscious, that needs to be met in its humanity and in its contraction. And more practical teachings actually allow people to meet all of that along the way.
Yes, and I just thought of one other thing. In a couple of excuse me, my throat's kind of scratchy. In a couple of messages about enlightenment, Jesus makes the point that if you think enlightenment doesn't include enlightened behavior, you're wrong. That enlightenment must include enlightened behavior, or it's not enlightened. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important message, because there are teachers out there who feel they are non-dual teachers, who feel they are fully enlightened, whose behavior is not enlightened. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much talk these days about embodiment and the importance of embodying the teachings. And that's pretty much what Jesus is saying as well. If your behavior is not Christ-like, is not kind, compassionate, accepting, non-judgmental, then you aren't done. You aren't finished. You're still on the path. You may be awakened, but you're not finished. And so there's awakening, and then there's full enlightenment. And there can be lifetimes that it may take lifetimes to go from someone who is awakened to someone who's fully enlightened. That doesn't necessarily happen in one lifetime.
Yeah. Beautiful. So let's listen to this message. And I just want to say to people who are watching the video, the message is about 16 minutes, and I very much suggest that you don't skip those 16 minutes, but you really give yourself the experience of listening. So I'll hand over to you, Gina, and you can say whatever else you may want to say to introduce the...
Okay, well, it's simply called The Will to Awaken. And I'll just shift over to putting that on the screen for you. Oh, I see. Okay, I didn't have these Okay. I didn't see where Nirmala stored my picture and my audio. Okay, we'll start over again. I got it now.
Maybe just to say while you're getting ready, Gina, that I chose that particular message because I felt that it would meet people where they're at. You know, we're all somewhere on the spiritual path, awakened, not awakened. Doesn't really matter. There is this ongoing opening that happens, and so that's what this is all about. And Gina, you're still looking for your image. Uh, so yeah, while we're waiting, maybe let's just be quiet and be in that quiet stillness until the message starts.
Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus.
Yeah, so while we're waiting, I can see that Nirmala is getting everything set up. So thank you, Nirmala. We must be about ready.
Greetings. This is the one you've known as Jesus the Christ. All of you are on the spiritual path. There comes a point in your evolution when you step on this path. And it may be that you occasionally step off it too. But once you are on the path, you are on the path and will continue to be moved forward on this path. At a certain point in someone's evolution, you are called to step on the path. And this calling and the timing of this calling is not up to you. There's so much about the spiritual path that is not up to you. And yet your will and your cooperation, your intention as you are on this path is very, very important, because you can always choose to not be on the path, to go against the path. You are always allowed that freedom. Your free will is truly free, and it is respected. Sometimes you feel lost and stuck, and many times it has nothing to do with anything that you are doing or not doing. Lost and stuck is a story when you believe you are not progressing as fast as you think you should be. But the truth is, you are not so much in control of your progressing. You have a certain amount of cooperation with what is unfolding within you that you are responsible for. But this unfolding is not something you are responsible for. This unfolding is just happening in its own timing and in its own way, and it has its own wisdom about its way and its timing. And you are not privy to this wisdom. You are not privy to what is going on deep and subtle levels in your spiritual growth, and that is as it's meant to be. There is only so much you can know and understand about this mysterious process of spiritual unfoldment. So one of the lessons along the way is to accept that you don't know and to not tell stories about it, particularly stories that would make you suffer along the way. So you give yourself over to this spiritual unfolding. You give yourself over and surrender by understanding how vast the powers are that are ruling your life and caring for you. These powers are wise and mysterious and so vast that you cannot understand them or manipulate them with your will. You can go against them, but you don't determine the actual unfolding of this plan. So a humble attitude is always important. As you progress spiritually, you see more and more that you are not in control of this life that you call my life. That in fact there is no such thing as my life, but just life living itself through you, expressing through you, and mysteriously creating through you the very life that you are living. The ego pretends that it is creating life, that it is making life happen, but it is only a co-creator. And in the end, it does not have the final say about what is created. And too often, it interferes with what is trying to be created through you. So this false sense of I is not really helpful. It's best that it get out of the way. And so the teachings about the false self are very important. It's important that you see that you are not doing your life and that you do not even have a life, that life has you. And this is good news because life is trustworthy. And when it has you and you allow it to have you fully, you will have the life that life intends for you. And that will be a good and fulfilling life, one that will make you happy. There comes a time when the will to awaken arises inside of you. And this is a will that is not from the ego, but from the deeper self. And this will cannot be generated by the ego. The will that announces your readiness to awaken is implanted in you. It's a gift that precedes awakening. This will can be co-opted by the ego and assumed to be your own will that is causing the unfoldment. This will to awaken drives the process of spiritual unfoldment, and it is what is behind the will to do the various things that support spiritual awakening, such as practices and living a certain kind of lifestyle that supports awakening. This will is the divine self awakening in you and beginning to take steps to support its expression in the world. When the divine begins to awaken within you, you feel it. You feel a pull and attraction to spiritual teachings, to meditation, to coming together with others who have a similar pull. This will is a gift. It is a natural part of the spiritual path. It is only a problem when it's not honored, when it's not listened to. Because when the divine awakens within someone, it demands a certain amount of attention. And if you do not give it your attention, it will call to you louder, or it will arrange circumstances to get you to notice the call. Sometimes these circumstances are difficult. Sometimes these circumstances destroy your structures, your comfort, your sense of identity, and then you wake up out of your usual state and say, what's going on? What do I need to do? Who am I? And these kinds of wake-up calls can happen at any point along the path, because it's very easy for people to fall back into creating structures that are designed by the ego and not by the divine self, until there is more and more of a listening to the divine within them. As you progress on the spiritual path, you are more likely to create structures in your life, work structures, relationships, that support this divine calling. And then your evolution is likely to speed up as you create a lifestyle that is in keeping with what the divine wants for you. Always the will needs to be aligned with the heart, not with the egoic mind, which will likely create very different structures than the heart. This awakening demands a new life structures often, and you have to be willing to create those structures to go along with the divine plan. So your willingness is crucial. Your willingness to see that there is something else here guiding your life other than the mind, and that it is taking you where you want to go. Your willingness and your intention to go in that direction is your greatest power in the unfoldment of the spiritual path. That is your main task, to have a willingness and to have an intention to go in that direction rather than the direction of least resistance, of your default, of what the egoic mind would have you do and how it would have you live. Now, when people hear this, they sometimes think, oh no, it means that I won't have the money or the comfort or the support that I want and that I need for my life. And that is what the egoic mind would tell you. If you go in the direction of the divine, it would say, you will not be supported. You will be shunned by people. You will not survive. That's what it will tell you, when in fact the opposite is true. So your willingness to go in the direction of your heart, of your divine calling, of what feels right inside you in the very depths of your soul, your willingness to go in that direction is extremely important. If you're not willing to go in that direction, you won't discover the benefits and the truth of that direction. You have to be willing to go in that direction and then take steps in that direction in order to discover the truth about that direction. And the truth is good news. But how can you know that if you don't try it, if you don't trust it, if you aren't willing to see what happens when you do? As I've said before, it takes great courage and strength to make the choice to go in the direction of your divine will, because you are faced with the unknown. When you follow your egoic mind, it tells you what is going to happen. It pretends to know. And that pretense at knowing is comforting. And so it's comfortable to follow the mind because it tells you, oh, if you do this, then this will happen. And as long as you believe that, there's a certain comfort in that, a certain sense of safety and security. But you're not facing the truth about life, that you can't know what is going to happen. But the other truth is that you don't need to know, because life is trustworthy when you follow divine will. But when you follow divine will, you will not know where it's taking you. Because in order to be aligned with divine will, you have to be aligned with the truth that you don't know where you're going and what's going to happen. You have to be willing to give up the pretenses and lies of the egoic mind that give you a false sense of security in order to drop into the truth, which is a place of the unknown. The unknown is scary to the ego. It doesn't want you to experience the unknown, so it makes up lies. But you have to be willing to live in the place of the truth, which is a place of knowing that you can't know. Are you willing to live in a place of knowing that you can't know what is going to happen in the next moment? And yet you don't need to know. It's perfectly safe not to know. And that's what you do discover when you stay long enough in this place of not knowing. So you have to be willing to go on this ride that the divine is taking you on. You have to be willing to say yes to going somewhere you've never gone before. But then that's always been the case. You've never really known where you were going. You just pretended. When you are aligned with the truth, you can relax and know that the truth will take you to your greatest potential, your happiest fulfillment, your best self. It could not do otherwise. Life is good, and by definition, it has to take you to a place of goodness, of happiness, of truth, of safety and security. It will naturally take you where you want to go, but you have to trust it. You have to trust that it will, without knowing for sure where it's going. Yes, your will and intention are very important on the spiritual path. And yet even these are not up to you. Whether you have the will, whether you're willing to make an intention, this willingness is not up to you. It is a gift that is given to you at a particular time in your evolution when it's right for the divine self to awaken within you. And so if you have this will and you have this intention, that is a very good sign. It is a gift. Be grateful for this gift and continue to align with this will and this intention. That's really your only job, and life will do the rest. It will unfold your spiritual path. It will progress you spiritually. It's already happening. Notice what already is happening. Delight in it. Know that it is trustworthy, and simply say yes to it. And so that is all we are asking of you today, to simply say yes to the divine energy that is a gift to you, that we will shower on you today. Say yes to it because it is part of your spiritual unfolding, and you have the willingness and intention, or you wouldn't be here. So make a more conscious intention to receive everything that you need to progress on your spiritual path, and it will be given today and always. So feel free to call upon us for help. We are there for you, but you must ask. So ask for our help, ask for our healing, and be open to receiving whatever it is that you need. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your openness. We are with you always.
Such a beautiful, beautiful message. Thank you. And I might in the video I might cut the
The part.
where we were kind of getting there.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yes.
I got flustered. And right.
So Gina, before we go to questions, before we open up the space, is there anything that you would like to add at this point?
One of the most most important messages that comes through in a lot of the messages, and it did in this one, and so I'll just underline it, is the power of intention and just making the choice to go in a certain direction, to go in the direction of love. To make that intention is a huge leap spiritually, to actually use our will to say, I am open, ready, and willing to have the experience that you want for me and to receive, whatever healing or help, assistance that you have for me, and to connect with those forces and not be afraid to ask for help and state, that you really want to move forward spiritually, because that is an important piece on the spiritual path. Our intention, our own will to align that with what is already unfolding. Our spiritual path, we're all unfolding anyway. But the more we align with that and the more we state that, the easier it will be for us to unfold in the ways we need to unfold.
Yes. So true. Yeah. So let me open the space to questions. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question? You could just, if your video is on, you can just wave to me. Okay, Victor, I'll unmute you. Here you are.
Can you hear
Welcome.
me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Yes. Gina, I just wanted to say that I do find the spoken channelings much more powerful than the old written ones. Just to confirm what you thought about that. And as a second thing, I've listened to the transmissions, but I really can't feel anything in the transmissions. Just wondering whether, I kind of stopped listening to them. Do you think that they might have an effect even though you can't feel anything?
Well, I'm told that they can't help but have an effect, whether you experience that or not within the transmission itself. A lot of people don't, well, I don't know a lot. I mean, I haven't taken a survey, but you're certainly not alone in not feeling the transmission when it's happening, that there are plenty of people who say they don't experience anything in particular when the transmission is happening. But it's still very likely that there are ways that things shift and change internally and in your life that correspond to having received those transmissions. So the effects are often not immediately apparent, but somebody finds themselves having the courage to quit their job that they couldn't quit before, and they didn't, and it didn't amount to the amount of turmoil that it would have in the past. Many people feel that they are more easily at a distance from their mind. That's probably the most common experience, that they feel that they can ignore their mind more easily than they ever could before, or that they don't get angry in traffic. And there's just some certain signs along the way, signs of spiritual progress that, and you know what, I want to say a little bit about spiritual progress, because it's a very funny thing. Spiritual progress is not easily measured or evaluated by us, but it's more like, in my experience, it's more like all of a sudden one day we realize, I'm not having those thoughts anymore. I'm not caring about, I'm not obsessing about this or that, or I'm not having a problem with this or that. And so and you don't know really when that fell away, but somehow it fell away. And so it's kind of mysterious how these things happen. And so I've often described spiritual progress as subtle but profound, because it's profound when when you find yourself not getting angry in a situation where you would usually get angry. And yet it's subtle too, because what it is the absence of something. So a lot of times spiritual progress is the absence of something. It's the absence of a reaction and a greater neutrality. And we don't often give that enough weight or consider that that is spiritual progress, but it is. As we progress, we become more and more neutral about things. We're less bothered, we're less upset, we're more easygoing, we're more in the flow. And these things are hard to put their finger on, and so that's the other thing about it, is that the effects may be subtle but profound, or not very easily identified. But I've been told that you can't help but be affected, unless there's a lack of openness, which most people, if they're attending, they're open sufficiently. I suppose somebody could be attending and have a lot of judgments or something like that, in which case they probably won't receive, and that will confirm their judgments about the whole thing. So openness is really the key thing. But so I guess that's what I have to say in response to that.
Well, thank you for that. Funny you should mention the quitting the job thing, because I just did that.
Oh, congratulations.
So maybe the transmissions are having an effect. I'll try to get back into listening to them. But thank you so much for your work, and the spoken channelings are a real help to me.
Thanks, Victor, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Victor. And I just want to stress, to highlight what Gina is saying, that sometimes we don't quite know whether something is affecting us, because there's not an experience of it affecting us, right? But that doesn't mean it's not affecting you. Like okay. you don't feel X-rays when you're in the X-ray machine.
Right.
But it still does what it does, and right. It's even used for therapeutic purposes. And you just may not feel very much at all.
And then again, the next time he attends, maybe he will feel something. So the mind tends to say, "Oh, this is how it is," but never how it is. There's an ever evolving thing, and the more transmissions you receive, the more likely you are probably going to be able to attune to those subtle energies a little better. But some people just are more sensitive than others. It's like everything else. Some people feel things and some people don't.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you, Victor. And you obviously feel the benefit of the messages, so something must be very receptive there. Okay, well, thank you. Is anybody else wanting to ask a question? Here, let's see, Radavi. I see your hand waving, but no face. Mm-hmm. Can you show us your face too?
Oh, there I am.
There you are. Okay, welcome. Hi. That's good. So go ahead.
Yeah, something mysterious happened when Gina was trying to get the tape on. My computer went blank, And I thought, oh, okay, I'll just wait and see what happens. And I thought, I need to see. My computer went off. I have never had that happen before. I wanted, anyway, I am so close to Christ. So I came in and he was talking about the willingness and intention. And I thought, I so relate to that. Because all my life, for a very, very long time, the idea, what I want is Christ consciousness. And embarrassingly, I have to say, I had no idea how I could describe what Christ consciousness was during that time. And so it means a lot to me to have listened to this. And thank you so much, Gina. Where can I hear the rest of these audios?
The audios have been made into two different books. And some of them are also available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, if you search Gina Lake and Nirmala. But you can purchase the audiobooks on our website or on Audible or iTunes. And they're called, it's part of a series of audiobooks that are called Jesus Speaking. And the two books that have the messages from the Christ Consciousness Transmission Gatherings are the two most recent Jesus Speaking books. It's called Jesus Speaking on Awakening to Love and Jesus Speaking on Embodying Christ Consciousness. And on my website, if you go to my website, radicalhappiness.com, and go to the audio tab, you'll see Jesus Speaking series, and it's the two top books, the two books that are on the top on that page. And you can, if you buy them on my website, they're in the form of MP3s that you can download to your computer and play.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And Grace, I did not want to miss this. And many times I don't have a chance because there's something else happening. And I was right at my computer doing something and said, wait a minute, this starts. And so I didn't even pay my donation because I didn't want to miss anything, which I'm going to go back to do. And I came in just when you just started. So
wonderful.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad you came, and donations are appreciated. You can.
Yes, I will.
That's fine. Not worry about that. Thank you, Vadavi.
Okay, thanks.
So let's see. There's two more questions that I see. I'll bring on Judy. Hi, Judy.
Hi. Thank you. So I have a question and a comment. And I'll start with the comment because, Gina, I've done a number of your transmissions and love them in that I resonate fully with it. It feels like I'm in the flow, and often my body moves in a way that it's like not intentional. It just kind of moves. Mm-hmm. And that kind of reinforces for me the truth. It's like that happens when I'm hearing the truth or when I'm in the flow of truth. So I love that. And so could you just tell me a little bit about that, why that happens, or anything you want to say about that?
Well, what you're describing might be what's called kriyas.
Yes, I believe it is.
Energy flowing through. It often moves the body in sort of jerky ways or all sorts of different ways that are kind of odd. A lot of people experience kriyas in meditation, for instance, or if they're sitting with a spiritual teacher, because there's a high vibration, and so that the body reacts. Once I think I heard that Kriyas happen because the energy is hitting an energetic block in the body, in the energy body. And so it causes the body to move in different ways. I haven't recently had Kriyas, but I had them for many years, every time I meditated. And it's it's a really natural and common experience that people have when their energy is being raised, their vibrations being raised when the Kundalini is working. So that's good. It's a good sign.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, just kind of an ongoing wonder I have about the message, clearly was that our will and intention are, to awaken or to be on a spiritual path are important components, and that we are being taken, we're being lived to joy and to happiness. And I'm a believer, and yet when I see such also horrendous stuff happening too, with people, that question comes up about about their experience and why they are having such difficult life experiences, and really horror at times in really horrendous situations too. So can you address that?
Yes, Jesus actually talks a lot about this in many of his books, because it's very important that we understand why there's suffering here, because otherwise we can just become bitter. And so basically, this is a very dense plane and a dense planet. It's on the lower rung of evolution. And it's set up to evolve. It's created so that we evolve on the basis of suffering. There's a duality here. There's good and evil, you could say. There's the egoic mind, the voice in our head, which is like the negative side of humanity. And then there's the divine self. And we're meant to find our way home to the divine self. And meanwhile, we're imprinted and programmed with a negative ego that keeps us behaving like animals, really, in a very primitive state, until there's so much suffering that sometimes we sort of wake up out of that and see how we're creating that for ourselves. And there's always been teachers on this planet who've known the truth and taught the truth, and who have been there to help point people away from suffering to love and forgiveness and compassion. So this is no doubt about it. This is a really difficult place to be, but it is a millisecond in eternity when we are eternal beings, and most of all of other existence that we have is beyond this level of suffering. So God's created a certain challenge, and it's set up to teach us love. All of it is pointing to love. Because if you respond to life with love, you won't suffer. If you align yourself with love, which is Christ consciousness, which is your divine self, you won't suffer, or suffer minimally. So you don't have to suffer. There doesn't have to be suffering, not very much anyway. And the most of the suffering on this planet is caused by people who are believing their egoic mind, the voice in their head. Mm-hmm. I have to have this to be happy, and it causes all this greed. Mm-hmm. Or that person is my enemy, I have to kill them. All of this comes from the thoughts in our mind, from our programming, from the most primitive self that's been given a voice somehow as the voice in our head. And we think it's our voice, and we think it's true. So humanity is lost in this illusion of untruth. And there's a way out of truth. If there wasn't a way out of truth, this would be hell. This would be unfair. This would maybe there would be a good reason to say there is no God. But there's a way out of suffering. And there's always a better choice to make than the choices that do cause suffering within ourselves and with others. And we're here to learn to make the choice of love, forgiveness, and compassion. And until we do, we will continue to suffer as individuals and as a society and as a world. And so this is very much addressed in the books. I would say that probably the book called All Grace is the one that is most addressed the issue of life here on earth. What is it all about? Who is God? What is God? What's going on here in life? That's All Grace. And that's available in an audiobook as well. I have a wonderful narrator who did narrate my first 4 books. He sounds like God. He's really good. So I would recommend that.
Thank you so much, Gina. That was very helpful.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Judy, for the question. I'm sure you asked that for a lot of people.
It's one of the strongest themes in all the books is life is good. Life is trustworthy. From the point of view of the egoic mind, it isn't. It doesn't seem to be, but that is the illusion. And we have to work a little hard to discover how beautiful and wondrous and what a gift this life is. It's good. There's love behind it all in everything. So it's an important teaching.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm just aware of time. We're coming to the end of our time together, but I'm going to bring on Lene. Lene, are you still wanting to ask your question? So I'll unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a very simple question. I noticed that in a transmission, Jesus talked about we. And I was wondering who we are. Who is he referring to? Jesus plus somebody else, some other beings, or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the transmissions that my husband and I do, there's a circle of ascended masters that, along with Jesus, that are involved in the transmissions. And so that's one reason he uses, Jesus says we sometimes. And then also, the beings who are that advanced, who are that evolved, they portray themselves as individual entities to help us relate to them, but they're so advanced that they don't really experience themselves as individuals, but as So my experience in channeling these very advanced beings is they almost always refer to themselves as we, because they're more merged on that level than we are here. But I think that in that particular message, Jesus was mostly referring to the other ascended masters that he works with in giving the transmissions. That message is given before doing the transmissions, and so I think that's why he used we in that. These days he's mostly just saying I in the messages, but it varies.
So Jesus is transmitting messages also from other beings, more advanced beings?
No, the message is coming through Jesus, but the energy of the transmissions is coming from the whole circle of beings.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
So, yeah, so maybe I should just explain for people who are watching the video that when we're talking about the messages, we're talking about messages that form the first part of Christ consciousness transmissions that Gina does with her husband Nirmala. And so the last two Jesus speaking books are basically the chapters in the books are a collection of these messages. So that's what's being referred to. You want to add anything to that, Gina?
Not really. I think the messages were given each week in the Christ Consciousness transmission gatherings to prepare people for the transmission. So they are meant to be little transmissions themselves to kind of bring people into that more peaceful, receptive state, kind of talk their mind, talk people out of their mind and into a place of truth. And then it makes the transmissions which follow the 17-minute transmission that follows the message is probably more easily received after having a 15-minute chat with Jesus, for those who are open to Jesus. Which is most people who do attend the transmissions feel a certain connection to Jesus and are open to the message and to the transmission. But the messages are a way to further deepen and prepare people to receive the transmission of energy, which is meant to accelerate people's evolution.
Yeah. So Lena, did you want to come back or is that good for you?
That's fine. Thank you.
That's good. Great. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I'm kind of minded, if that's okay by you, Gina, to offer the space for one more question.
Oh, sure.
If anybody wants to come in. Yeah, Marika. Go ahead. You're unmuted. I had a sense that you were wanting to come in. That's why I asked.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask Gina about about the world. It's so easy to be with it in the transmissions and maybe afterwards. So easy to be more alone. But how do you deal with people that are maybe not on a spiritual path or difficult people,
This is probably the most common question I get because it's such a universal issue. It's hard to be in the world. It's hard, especially to be in the world around other people, to engage with them, especially people who are not on the path. You get better at it as you progress. It can be hard to hold your own in the presence of egos because they can bring you into the egoic state of consciousness pretty easily, like with a judgment. There's a learning to see the truth about what's going on inside of them and to have compassion and forgiveness for them. So in other words, I guess the words, Jesus' words, forgive them for they know not what they do, come to mind. In a sense, you have to develop a certain attitude of not superiority, but just compassion for the human condition. Because when people are behaving from their egos, as they so often do, they aren't in control of it and they don't even know there's another way. And so they don't have the understanding that you have that allows you to make a choice, to choose something else. And so this is the state of, I don't know what percentage, 98% of the people on planet Earth don't know the truth. They don't know they don't know what's causing their suffering. They don't know how to get out of their suffering. And unless they're coming to you for that information, it really isn't your business to give it to them. So you just have to do the best you can in holding your own state of consciousness within their presence. And the best way to do that is to have a practice of meditation that will help you to hold that state that you achieve in meditation while you're out in the world. So a practice of meditation is really important, and that makes it much more possible for you to walk that talk and carry that consciousness to other people instead of getting brought down by other people. But it's a long process. It's a long process of evolution before we're really able to hold our own, and we have to be gentle with ourselves. When we screw up and we get caught up, we have to forgive ourselves and move on and just do the best we can in any moment. That's all that is required, is to do the best we can. And of course, we're going to make mistakes and get caught up because the ego, the illusion, is extremely compelling, extremely convincing. And it takes a long time to see through it all and to not get caught time and time again in it. So, but eventually, the more and more you choose to be loving, be compassionate, be understanding, be forgiving, the more that becomes your default instead of the judgment and anger and whatever negativity that ego has to contribute. So, you get better at it, and we have to all just hang in there, do our best, do our practices to help to overcome that pull of the egoic mind. It is a formidable opponent, for sure.
Okay, thank you. If it happens, sometimes I can notice that it happens that I will get into my ego. But how you stop it? Maybe when I notice it, it's a bit late.
No, noticing is noticing is the first step. And meditation develops your ability to notice. Once you notice, there's a choice. Now, it may take, maybe you won't make the right choice after you notice it, but eventually you will. You don't, first, it goes in stages. First, we notice our mind and we notice what's going on, but we still may do our default, do what we're used to doing. Eventually, we notice and we develop some ability to choose differently than our default. And so the more you get better and better at choosing to do something other than the default. And it just takes time, it takes practice. But noticing is the first and most very important step. If you don't notice what's going on, you have no choice. You're caught. And that's where most people exist. So the fact that you can notice at times is huge. It's a huge step in one's evolution when they're able to be aware of their own thoughts and aware of what's going on and aware of the truth. It's huge. So you're on your way and there's no turning back. You won't go back. You can't go backwards, really. You'll go forward, but it takes time.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika, for that question. And you're speaking for everybody, and so since we've gone over time, I just want to thank you, Gina, for this conversation and for being here for the questions also.
Thank you, Grace, for all that you do to make these things happen. I know what a lot of work it is, and I really appreciate all of the support you've given me over the years for my work and your support today. Thank you so much. And all of you who showed up, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's not so much that I want to support your work. I mean, I'm happy to, but it keeps calling me to be shared. So I'm just happy to share it because I feel what you're putting into the world is just very beautiful and very helpful to a lot of people. So yeah, so thank you again. And if you've enjoyed this, being here, the answers to the questions or watching the video, I do appreciate donations for these offerings. You can do so on the website living-from-love.com or on the event page, if in case you have a link to the event page. And we'll be continuing actually next week, next Sunday. There'll be a conversation on opening to the shadow. It's a slightly different way of looking at things, but it's really about, you know, how to respond to the ego arising. So yeah, we'll see. We'll look into this with Craig Holliday, who is a kind of younger generation non-dual spiritual teacher and also therapist. So wishing well to you all. Thank you again to Gina, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.